Last video we looked at 17th century philosopher and mathematician René Descartes and his famous aphorism, "I think therefore I am," also known as the cogito. Specifically, we looked at the intentions of his meditations, which were to establish an indubitable foundation by which all further knowledge can be built upon. This video then, as promised in the last, will be my verdict on whether Descartes' project to build further knowledge off of his new foundation was a success. So if you haven't seen the last video, I recommend going back and watching it for a fuller understanding of the following discussion. If you can't be bothered for that though, here is the 30-second rundown. Descartes wants to know what, if anything, can we know with certainty, and he wants to build more certainty, more knowledge off of this indubitable foundation. More crudely, Descartes wants to find the smallest nugget of truth from which he can build an entire structure of knowledge that is indubitable and can't be doubted. So in the first two meditations, he tries to identify what we can know with certainty using the method of doubt. The method of doubt involves taking everything that can be minutely doubted and treating it as if it were false, and repeating this process until only certainty remains. This doubt occurs in three different waves. 1. Descartes doubts the senses since they can sometimes deceive. 2. Descartes doubts the external world since he could be dreaming. And 3. Descartes operates under the assumption that an evil demon is employing all of his efforts to deceive him. After progressing through these waves, Descartes arrives upon the one thing he can know for certain and which he will use as a foundation for all further knowledge. This thing is the cogito, that he exists in some form. But does he succeed in actually building further knowledge off of this foundation? I'll suggest that Descartes doesn't succeed in building further knowledge off of the cogito, and this is because his method of doubt is too intense, so much so that it collapses Descartes' project before it even begins. The kind of doubt that Descartes has in the meditations, radical doubt, questions whether knowledge is possible at all, whether that be through one's own senses or one's own cognitive faculties like memory and reason. But crucially, doubting everything includes doubting any of your senses or cognitive faculties that you could use to secure knowledge. This undercuts Descartes' very reason for doubting, which was to secure knowledge. This shows how Descartes' doubt is too intense. The method of doubt was supposed to be a tool for securing knowledge, but its intensity omits all roots to it. This is, what I think, the main issue with Descartes' project to build further knowledge off of the cogito. It now looks tricky for him to build further knowledge off of it when all of his routes to knowledge are not secure. So we have two questions. 1. How does Descartes attempt to build further knowledge then? And 2. Why does his attempt fail because of the problem I just raised? Why does it fail because the method of doubt is too intense? To answer question 1, how does Descartes attempt to build further knowledge then? We proceed to his third meditation. Recall that at this point in the meditations, Descartes is under the assumption that an evil demon is employing all of his efforts to deceive him, such that even the truth of his clear and distinct ideas are not secure. Clear and distinct ideas are those ideas that can't be doubted when the mind is actively attending to them, and Descartes thinks that anything perceived in this way must be true. For example, that 2 plus 3 is 5, or that a square has 4 sides. When I hold these in my mind, their truth is impossible to deny. But still, an evil demon could have made Descartes with a defective nature, or interfered with his reasoning, again, such that even these aren't secure. Descartes concludes that the only way to secure the truth of his clear and distinct ideas is to prove the existence of God. God being supremely good wouldn't allow Descartes to be systematically deceived, so if he exists, then Descartes can be confident in the truth of his clear and distinct ideas, and therefore can use these ideas to build further knowledge off of the cogito. I won't go into the details of Descartes' proof of God, because that's a whole other video. What matters for our purposes is the structure of the argument, because that's where the problem lies, so I'll present it in its crudest form, just enough to reveal the problem. Here's the argument. Descartes has an idea of an infinite being with perfections like omnipotence, omnibenevolence, etc. But Descartes himself is finite and imperfect, so how could he have produced this idea that represents something infinite and perfect? If he did generate it himself, then something would have come from nothing. Infinity would have come from finity. But crucially, something can't come from nothing, Descartes says that something truly infinite and perfect then must exist to be the cause of his idea. That something is God. Now we will answer question 2. So first, I'll show the famous objection to his attempts, and then I'll show the deeper reason for why it fails, which will link back to my suggestion that the method of doubt is too intense. A premise that the argument rests on is that something can't come from nothing. Crucially though, the truth of this idea, that something can't come from nothing, comes from it being a clear and distinct one. When Descartes actively perceives this in his mind, its truth is undeniable. The issue is that the truth of clear and distinct ideas is what Descartes is trying to secure, but to prove God here, he uses this clear and distinct idea whose truth is not yet secure until God is proven. The idea isn't yet secure because the evil demon's power is still in play. This is what philosophers call a circular argument, where you assume the very thing you're trying to prove. This is problematic for Descartes because a circular argument proves nothing. Already assuming what you're trying to prove means you haven't actually demonstrated anything at all. Descartes wants to prove God so that he can secure the truth of his clear and distinct ideas, but is using a clear and distinct idea to prove God. He is assuming the truth of clear and distinct ideas before he has even proved that they are secure. So, if proving God relies on clear and distinct ideas, and the truth of clear and distinct ideas relies on God, then it is unclear how Descartes can prove God in the first place, since the truth of his clear and distinct ideas are not yet secure. This is one of the most famous objections to Descartes' proof of God, and it is known as the Cartesian Circle. We mustn't dismiss Descartes' project now. The circle is problematic, but we ought to be charitable and consider Descartes' reply. The best reply that Descartes can give is to deny that one relies on the other. Either clear and distinct ideas don't rely on God for their truth, or God doesn't rely on clear and distinct ideas for his truth. It's the former of these that Descartes takes in his replies to the Meditation's objections. Clear and distinct ideas don't rely on God for their truth. It's the best reply because it denies the existence of a circle altogether. Instead, Descartes says that his clear and distinct ideas were true all along, and that the deceiver's power only matters once he is no longer actively perceiving a clear and distinct idea in his mind. For example, when Descartes holds that 2 plus 3 is 5 in his mind, it's simply true. Its truth is only compromised by the evil demon when he relies on his memory for the truth of the idea, i.e. when he concludes that 2 plus 3 is 5 is true because he recalls that he previously clearly and distinctly perceived it. Therefore, the purpose of proving God is only to secure his memory, such that even when he is no longer perceiving a clear and distinct idea in his mind, he can still be certain of its truth. He says, "At first we are sure that God exists because we are attending to the argument that proves this. But afterwards, all we need to be certain that God exists is our memory that we did earlier perceive this clearly. This memory wouldn't be sufficient if we didn't know that God exists and isn't a deceiver." This defeats the circularity because the truth of clear and distinct ideas no longer rely on God. They were true all along, and God only secures their truth indefinitely, even when they aren't being perceived. Descartes' reply is good. It acknowledges the circularity and works to defeat it. But I think his reply is insufficient. Descartes' reply only works if memory isn't actually used in the process of proving God. If memory is used in his proof of God, then his reply just describes a bigger circle. Memory is relied upon for the truth of clear and distinct ideas are relied upon for the truth of God, and God is relied upon to guarantee memory. If memory isn't used, however, then Descartes defeats the charges of circularity. Clear and distinct ideas prove God without relying on anything that proving God is intended to secure, i.e. memory. Descartes himself didn't think his proof relied on memory. Taking this part of the earlier quote, "At first we are sure that God exists because we are attending to the arguments that prove this." He thought the whole argument was attended to actively, so memory wasn't relied on in the proof, meaning the evil demon's power didn't threaten the truth of the clear and distinct ideas used, and therefore didn't affect the argument. I don't think this is plausible though. I think that memory must have been relied on when Descartes was going through his argument. Proving God is a temporarily extended argument, and Descartes can't hold all of the premises and conclusion in his mind in an instantaneous act of intuition. Proving God requires attending to premises A, B, and conclusion C, but once Descartes is at B and C, he is already relying on his memory for A. For example, even if we present the argument in its crudest premise-conclusion form, it seems implausible that Descartes could go through the argument without using his memory. For example, premise 1. I have an idea of an infinite being with perfections x, y, and z. Premise 2. This idea has infinite reality because of what it represents. Premise 3. Something can't come from nothing, so the idea couldn't have been produced by my finite mind. Premise 4. Something truly infinite and perfect must exist to be the cause of my idea. Conclusion 1. That something must be God. Conclusion 2. God exists. Here we see that even when we try and present the argument as succinctly as possible, it still requires 4 premises leading to a final conclusion. It seems inevitable that Descartes, in thinking about this argument, would need to rely on his memory. Therefore, the circularity still bites Descartes. Memory is relied upon to prove God, and God is relied upon to guarantee memory. Even if we accept that clear instinct ideas don't rely on God for their truth, and that God guarantees memory instead, Descartes still uses his memory to prove God, which presupposes the very thing he's trying to secure, which still renders the argument circular. Therefore, Descartes' attempt to build further knowledge off of the cogito fails. But the deeper reason it fails brings us back to the point I mentioned earlier. The method of doubt is simply too intense. Again, by doubting everything, Descartes doubts any route that he can use to get to knowledge, any cognitive or sensory faculty. But proving God inevitably uses one of these routes, and because of the method of doubt, these routes are not yet reliable, meaning any attempt to prove God will be circular. So the Cartesian circle isn't just an isolated flaw in Descartes' reasoning, it's a symptom of this deeper problem. Once Descartes has doubted everything, any attempt to rebuild knowledge will inevitably assume the truth of some faculty that has already been called into doubt, again making any attempt to build further knowledge circular. To conclude the video, I think that Descartes' project to build further knowledge off of an indubitable foundation fails, and it fails because his method of doubt is too intense. So much so that it's self-defeating to Descartes' own project. He wanted to gain an edifice of certain knowledge, but the method of doubt makes it impossible to gain knowledge at all. Thank you for watching, and as for next video, maybe we can go into more depth about Descartes' proof of God and evaluate it on its own terms, setting aside the structural issue we focused on here. Or perhaps we can move on to a completely different topic. Let me know down in the comments.